The DUP held talks over the Prime Minister's Brexit deal, amid suggestions Northern Ireland could be offered more money. Chancellor Philip Hammond was one of the senior ministers in the meeting, which led to speculation by MPs that the government may be thinking about setting aside more money for the DUP as part of its confidence and supply agreement. Earlier today, most eurosceptic sources in the ERG said they're not going to fold, and they are prepared to spend the rest of my life fighting for this, after the Prime Minister's deal suffered its second defeat this week. The source said, the government has collapsed. As of now we are still leaving on March 29. The fundamentals are unchanged, however others in the ERG are desperately hoping to find a way to back the deal and make sure Brexit happens. Lucy Allan, MP for Telford, said she could vote differently when the deal is offered to MPs for a third time. She said, I have to seriously consider supporting the Prime Minister's deal, although in my view it is a worse option than Remain. Meanwhile, Bournemouth MP Conor Burns said, I'm actively looking for reasons to support the withdrawal agreement, that's why the Attorney General's advice was so important. Critical to many of us, the DUP have been holding further talks with the UK government over Brexit ahead of third vote. Image Getty. This morning, arch-Europhile Guy Verhofstadt has told the European Union should not allow a Brexit delay, despite MPs emphatically demanding an extension to Article 50 in last night's Commons drama. The European Parliament's Brexit representative has moved to hold Theresa May to the March 29 deadline and is trying to gather EU support for blocking an Article 50 extension unless the Prime Minister can provide concrete proposals on what she would use the extra time for. In the wake of yesterday's parliamentary theatrics, Mr. Verhofstadt tweeted, why EUC should allow an extension if the UK government majority in the House of Commons are not ready for a cross-party approach to break the current deadlock. Earlier in the day, the former Belgian Prime Minister spoke out against delaying Brexit in the Strasbourg Assembly and called on British MPs to reach an agreement on exactly what they want. Guy Verhofstadt has questioned whether the EU should allow a Brexit delay. Image Getty. Please make up your minds in London. Guy Verhofstadt. Mr. Verhofstadt said, I am against every extension, whether an extension of 1 day, 1 week, even 24 hours, if it's not based on a clear opinion of the House of Commons for something. He added, please make up your minds in London, because this uncertainty cannot continue. Not for us, not for Britain, and certainly not for our citizens. Follow express.co.uk live Brexit updates below. 9:20 p.m. is a long extension on the cards. May's de facto Deputy Cabinet Office Minister David Lidington said he hoped the United Kingdom would leave in an orderly fashion, but if May's deal was not approved, then there may be a long delay. Mr. Lidington told BBC Radio, I hope that MPs, lawmakers of all parties will be over this weekend reflecting on the way forward. He added the legal default was still that Britain would leave on March 29, unless something else is agreed. EU leaders will consider pressing Britain to delay by at least a year to find a way out of this. 8:10 p.m. update. Delaying Britain's exit from the European Union could present an opportunity to rework the bloc's approach to negotiating with London. A possible delay to the March 29 exit date, which British lawmakers voted overwhelmingly on Thursday to seek, will top the agenda when EU leaders meet in Brussels late next week. While German Conservatives would prefer Britain to stay in the EU or else adopt Prime Minister Theresa May's divorce deal, senior Conservative politician Detlef Seif said that failing those scenarios he would back a delay until the end of 2020. In the event of a such delay, Mr. Seif told Reuters, I am of the view that we should change the EU's guidelines. After Britain voted to leave in 2016, European negotiators stuck firmly to a two-stage approach, refusing to discuss anything about future trading ties until London settled its financial obligations, agreed mutually acceptable rules for expatriate citizens, and found a way to avoid trouble on the EU's only land border with the United Kingdom and Northern Ireland. However, the difficulties of negotiating the divorce deal without opening up negotiations on future trading terms have led to problems over EU insistence on a backstop insurance policy for the border that has caused British politicians to refuse to ratify the deal. Mr. Seif said shifting beyond the two-stage approach could assuage the concerns of EER members of Parliament, including the European Research Group (ERG), who fear the backstop could leave Britain trapped in the customs union forever against its will. He said, "Psychologically, it is important that we change this because the European Research Group thinks this is a trick." Detlef Seif says he would back a delay until the end of 2020 if needed. Image Getty, 7:32 p.m. Barnier breaks ranks and condemns EU's Brexit tactics. EU chief negotiator Michel Barnier has opened up on how Europe has been strengthened by Brexit's negative agenda. He also admitted the EU has not prioritized the interests over its citizens, leading to some regions feeling excluded. Mr. Barnier told Euronews the EU needs to do more to protect its members so Brexit is not repeated elsewhere. He said, "You have to listen, you have to understand, you have to answer. A large number of these voters voted in the same way you get in certain regions of France, Belgium, Italy or other countries. It is the feeling of being abandoned, the feeling of exclusion, the feeling that Europe doesn't protect, that Europe is run by a bureaucracy that does not listen. I think we need to learn from Brexit. It's no doubt too late for the UK, but it's time to do it for others." 6:58 p.m. Update. Corbyn urged to back cross-party talks on Brexit referendum. Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn has been asked to join cross-party talks by other opposition leaders in the Commons, the SNP, Liberal Democrats, Plaid Cymru and the Green Party called on Mr. Corbyn to join them in trying to push for a second referendum. SNP Westminster leader Ian Blackford said, "It is now clear beyond doubt that there is no such thing as a good Brexit, and Westminster remains deeply divided. The best and most democratic way forward is to put a decision back to the people in a second EU referendum, with Remain on the ballot paper." He added, "I hope Jeremy Corbyn will now join us, after 2 years of declining invitations to talk." 6:30 p.m. The four options facing Britain as time runs out for Theresa May's Parliament struggles to come to an agreement on how best to exit the bloc. Here are four options Mrs. May faces. 1. Stick to the deadline. March 29. Friday, March 29 is the end date of the 2-year negotiation period between the EU and UK, but negotiations have ended in a stalemate. Mrs. May has stated she wishes to extend the deadline to June 30 should her deal be approved in the third vote next week. EU leaders have said they would agree to technical extension, lasting a few weeks should the deal be finalised with the Commons, to extend for just a few weeks. May 10 to 22. Between May 23 to 26, Europeans vote for a new European Parliament. Many leading figures have said Britain must be out before then to avoid any legal challenge to the legislature's legitimacy. If the UK has not left the bloc by then, they will have to elect their own members of European Parliament, MEPs. 3. Leave before European Parliament sits. June 30 should Mrs. May's deal be approved in the third vote next week. June 30 is the date she has set for exit. Factoring in time for legislation, the EU could accept a delay beyond their elections, as the new Parliament will not sit until July 2. If Britain had left the bloc before July 2, the lack of British MEPs would not prove to be a legal problem. However, will an extension for 2 or 3 months solve the issues? The EU has eliminated the possibility of reworking the withdrawal deal, and if it is not passed, the delay could give businesses the chance to prepare for a disruptive exit. 4. Rethink, for a year or perhaps 2, should the Prime Minister's deal fail for the third time next week. She has pledged to ask for an extension to reconsider the position. President of the European Council Donald Tusk is urging the other 27 EU leaders to not rule it out. If Mrs. May attends the Brussels summit without a deal, Mr. Tusk may suggest that a short delay will not achieve much. Apart from extending the feeling of uncertainty to avoid a disruptive deal, Britain may be asked to rethink what it really wants, creating time for a new election or second Brexit referendum. This extension has been suggested by some to be until the end of this year, some for 1 year and others until the end of 2020 or 2 years, leaving the time frame open is not legally possible according to EU officials. This option would see Britain avoiding no-deal chaos, but having to choose MEPs to sit in the European Parliament, disrupting a redistribution of seats. 5:51 p.m. update. The pound has its best week since January. British sterling rose today after being stuck at 1.7% against the dollar this week. The pound, which has traded between $1.2945 and $1.3380 this week, rose 0.4% to $1.3294 in late London trading. It also strengthened against the euro, reversing earlier losses to add 0.2%, 85.245 pence per euro. This came after British MPs voted against leaving the EU without a deal and backed a delay to the March 29 withdrawal date this week. Investors believe Britain may avoid a chaotic EU exit which would severely damage its economy. Lynn Graham-Taylor, rates strategist at Rabobank, said, "We have seen a risk on trade for in the last couple of days as the market thinks it is less likely we will leave without a deal." 5:21 p.m. update. DUP to hold more talks next week, a spokesman for the DUP said. Nigel Dodds will be staying in touch with the British government over the weekend by phone. The spokesman added that DUP leader Arlene Foster has been kept informed during a visit to the United States and is expected to return from Washington on Saturday. Earlier, Mr. Dodds said his party wanted to agree a deal, but the issue of the so-called Irish backstop remained the key problem. Brexit Live. Nigel Dodds speaks to the media outside the Cabinet Office today. Image Getty. 4:11 p.m. update. Ministers hold constructive talks with DUP. Nigel Dodds, the deputy leader of the DUP, said his party wanted to agree a Brexit deal, but the issue over the so-called Irish backstop remained the key problem. He said there had been good talks with senior British ministers, including Finance Minister Philip Hammond, and progress had been made, but it was insufficient and much would depend on what guarantees the government could offer. Mr. Dodd said to reporters after the meeting, "We have always said that we want to get a deal, but it has to be the right deal." He added his party had been very disappointed by the legal opinion put forward by the British Attorney General this week on the backstop. Now the government is very focused on ensuring that the issue of the backstop, the separation of Northern Ireland from the rest of the United Kingdom, that is addressed, he said. 3:33 p.m. update. UK should not be afraid to leave with no deal. Brexit Secretary Steve Barclay has now said Britain should consider leaving the EU without a deal if Theresa May cannot secure backing from MPs over her deal. He said to the BBC today, "If we can get the deal through, as I hope we still will, we will now need a short, technical extension, but if not, we shouldn't be afraid to leave with no deal." 2:54 p.m. update. Likely Juncker replacement warns EU not to get dragged into British chaos. Leading candidate to replace Jean-Claude Juncker as European Commission President has warned the EU against extending Article 50 without a plan for fear of being drawn into this week's Commons chaos. The European People's Party European Parliament Group leader Manfred Weber tweeted, "It is not enough for the British Parliament to say that we want to extend it, we also have to know what the goal is. The EU must not be dragged into the British chaos." Manfred Weber has warned the EU against being dragged into Brexit chaos. Image Getty. 2:46 p.m. update. BMW continues no deal. Worst scenario. Preparations. Carmaker BMW is continuing to prepare for a no-deal Brexit, which it said was the worst-case scenario, in the wake of this week's Commons votes. A spokesman for BMW said, "As a responsible employer, we must therefore continue to prepare for the worst-case scenario, which is what a no-deal would represent, in order to prepare for a postponement of Brexit." The BMW Group is currently examining various scenarios. Preparations cover all key areas of our business, including manufacturing, sales, customs processes, IT and logistics. BMW builds Mini and Rolls-Royce cars in Britain and over 375,000 engines. 2:37 p.m. update. Netherlands open to Article 50 extension. Dutch Prime Minister Mark Rutte said his country is open to delaying Brexit, but Theresa May must explain what that delay would be used for. Speaking to reporters while hosting European Council President Donald Tusk in The Hague. Mr. Rutte said, if they want a delay, the British need to explain how they plan to ensure a different outcome. 2:34 p.m. update. Financial markets operating on soft Brexit. Hopes. Finance analysts believe markets are trading on the belief Britain will leave the EU under a soft Brexit after this week's series of Commons votes. Lynn Graham-Taylor, rates strategist at Rabobank, said markets are now trading on expectations of a softer Brexit. She added, we have seen a risk-on trade for Brexit in the last couple of days as the market thinks it is less likely we will leave without a deal. The Economist's comments came after core Eurozone bond yields edged higher following the vote to extend Article 50 and reject no deal. 2:18 p.m. update. Nigel Farage drinking less to prepare for May elections. Health-conscious Nigel Farage has cut down on alcohol in order to have a clear mind in case he is called upon to stand in European Parliament elections in May. However, the former UKIP leader, who has vowed to stand for the Brexit party if Britain is forced to hold European elections, is still drinking 5 times the recommended daily allowance. Mr. Farage admitted he is still drinking a steady 10 units a day. He told The Telegraph, I've cut down on the booze. That was my usual pre-lunch consumption during my city days. I've lost loads of weight and feel incredibly fit. I'm getting ready to take on the Brexit blockers. If they want to take me on, I'll be there, and this time, it'll be no more Mr. Nice Guy. 1:52 p.m. update. Germany cold on Brexit extension. German Justice Minister Katharina Barley has warned the EU against granting an Article 50 extension with no plan. Ms. Barley said such a move would not bring a solution to the impasse. However, she conceded the EU would be very willing to grant a delay if Theresa May can present Brussels with concrete proposals about what she would use the extra time for. The politician, who Social Democratic Party of Germany is in coalition with Angela Merkel's Christian Democratic Union Party, told now.ch only giving more time brings no solution, but you have to have some plan of what's going to happen in that time. German Justice Minister Katharina Barley has said a Brexit delay should only come with clear solution. Image Getty. Ms. Barley's comments echoed CDU MEP Elmar Brok, who called for clarity from the British government. Bro told SWR, we do not just want to go on for 2 or 3 months as we did before. He added, and postponement to Brexit would mean that Great Britain will take part in the European elections. That does not make much sense to me. Mr. Brok added a country leaving the European Union should not vote in the new Commission or decide upon the new medium-term financial plan. German MEP Elmar Brok has said Britain should not participate in May's European Parliament elections. Image Getty. 1:28 p.m. update. Government and DUP working through the weekend to break Brexit deadlock. Britain's Attorney General will work over the weekend with the Northern Irish party that props up Theresa May's government on a possible agreement to break the Brexit impasse. Sky's deputy political editor said the two sides were looking at what additional provisions could be added to domestic law to underline interpretations on the backstop, the key part of the EU divorce deal that the Democratic Unionist Party (DUP) has objected to. Separately, The Sun said Chancellor Philip Hammond had been called into the talks. 12:54 p.m. update. What is Europe saying about this week's Commons chaos? European press outlets have been scathing in the criticism of Theresa May and MPs after a tumultuous week of Brexit votes that has left the withdrawal agreement on the brink and an Article 50 extension almost inevitable. Spain's El País said Brexit is dying because of the radical inability of the British state to agree with itself. The newspaper added EU politicians should only grant an Article 50 extension for a soft Brexit for new elections or a second referendum in Belgium. The Standard also said Theresa May's deal is dead, adding she must resort to blackmailing Parliament in order to bring it back to life by threatening a long Brexit delay. Poland's Rich Pospolita said Theresa May has completely lost her credibility, while Romania's Adevărul said the Conservatives have sent Britain into chaos, and questioned if Europe is on course to follow Neuer. Zürcher Zeitung, Switzerland's newspaper of record, said the current situation, which has resulted in Europe having to wait until next week's developments to play out, is outrageous, but added Brussels would have no choice but to agree to an extension if it were requested. Finally, Slovakian political news website said Theresa May is waging a war of attrition with MPs, and her strategy is to simply hope they give up sooner than she does. 12:32 p.m. update, DUP in talks with government over meaningful vote. 3 Northern Ireland's Democratic Unionist Party, the party propping up Theresa May's fragile premiership, is in ongoing and significant discussions with the government over the Brexit deadlock. The government is hoping to win over the DUP to supporting the withdrawal agreement ahead of a likely third meaningful vote next week. Downing Street believes DUP backing is key to unlocking support from the URG, which could be enough to squeeze her deal through the House of Commons. 12:21 p.m. update, Amber Rudd defends herself to pro-Brexit constituents. Amber Rudd has written to people in her pro-Brexit constituency explaining why she defied the Prime Minister to vote against no-deal Brexit earlier this week. The Work and Pensions Secretary wrote that she believed no-deal Brexit would do generational damage to our economy and security. Ms. Rudd added, "It is a mistake to leave the EU without a deal, but it is right to prepare to do so, just in case, so we can mitigate any damage as best as we can." Ms. Rudd's Hastings and Rye constituency voted by 55% in favour of Brexit. She risked being sacked for defying the Tory whip along with 3 other cabinet colleagues, but all emerged from the rebellion with their government jobs amid Brexit calls for their resignation. Business Secretary Greg Clark, Justice Secretary David Gauke, and Scotland Secretary David Mundell also risked the PM's wrath by ignoring her 3-line whip. Amber Rudd has written to her pro-Brexit constituents explaining why she voted against no deal. Image Reuters, 11:59 a.m. update, Luxembourg PM, MPs cannot demand Brexit. Lay then, keep calm and drink tea. Luxembourg's Prime Minister has appeared to mock Britain's approach to Brexit. Xavier Bettel said, MPs cannot demand a Brexit delay and then just drink tea until they come up with a solution. Mr. Bettel tweeted, "Keep calm and drink tea is not an option for Brexit in the following days. We need a very clear
and comprehensive reason for a delay extending Article 50. Keep calm and drink tea is not an option for
the following days. We need a very clear and comprehensive reason for a delay extending Article 50. XB, Xavier Bettel, at Xavier Bettel, March 14, 201,911.32 am update, pro-Brexit fishermen assemble huge flotilla. Pro-Brexit flotilla of fishing boats demanding Britain leaves the EU without a deal on March 29 has united on the River Tyne ahead of Nigel Farage's march setting off tomorrow. Express.co.uk will join the Brexit march from Sunderland to London tomorrow and hear from members of the public who voted leave and want the PM to get on with Brexit. The fishermen's organisation, Fishing for Leave, set off from North Shields, North Tyneside, up the river and headed for Newcastle's quayside. Pro-Brexit fishermen are amassing a huge flotilla on the River Tyne. Image Getty. The flotilla made its way through the choppy waters of the Tyne, while a battered trawler was driven on the back of a lorry by road, heading for the meeting point in the city centre. A Fishing for Leave spokesman said, "The terms of the withdrawal agreement were an existential threat to fishing and a total betrayal of Brexit and Britain. It means a second surrender of our industry and coastal communities and places a constitutional bomb under democracy." The exasperated group is demanding Britain leaves on March 29. Image Getty, 11:05 a.m. update, Dutch PM welcomes Donald Tusk to the Hague. Dutch Prime Minister Mark Rutte has said the current withdrawal agreement is the only deal on the table as he met Donald Tusk. The European Council President is in The Hague for talks with Mr. Rutte on how the bloc will react to MP's decision to attempt an Article 50 extension. Donald Tusk has arrived in the Netherlands for talks with Dutch Prime Minister Mark Rutte. Image Reuters, 10:58 a.m. PM's no-deal tariffs are incompatible with WTO rule. An EU commissioner has said Theresa May's no-deal tariff plans unveiled earlier this week are likely to breach World Trade Organization rules. Phil Hogan, Brussels' Agriculture and Rural Development Commissioner, said the plan to keep imports going into Northern Ireland tariff-free could be invalid if Britain leaves without a deal and has to trade on WTO terms. The Irish politician said the scheme was political and designed to change in the news cycle from the political chaos on London. Speaking about the plans at an agricultural conference in Dublin, Mr. Hogan said, "I think they are incompatible with WTO rules. I think the timing of it was unfortunate and it was a deliberate attempt to put Ireland more on the agenda, as if it wasn't on the agenda already." 10:17 a.m. update. Brexiters reject May's desperate new legal advice. Leading Brexiters have rejected further legal advice. Theresa May was relying on to finally squeeze her Brexit deal through Parliament. Mrs. May is planning to put a withdrawal agreement to MPs for a third time next week after Attorney General Geoffrey Cox said a loophole in the Vienna Convention on International Treaties would allow Britain to exit the backstop on its own terms. However, the new advice is erroneous and badly misconceived, according to a report by top eurosceptic Tory lawyers. Theresa May is desperately hoping Mr. Cox's new advice will be enough to squeeze her deal through. Image Getty. Mr. Cox had been adamant the UK could shut down the backstop if it is deemed to have a socially destabilising effect on Northern Ireland under Article 62 of the Vienna Agreement, but the Brexiteer group said the clause could only be invoked under extreme circumstances, and pointed out the fall of the Soviet Union was not deemed sufficient enough in previous attempts to use the law. Red Moore revealed the new Geoffrey Cox legal advice he hopes will save Theresa May's deal. 9:57 a.m. update. Ireland deeply welcomes Brexit delay. Dublin has welcomed MP's decision to seek a Brexit delay. Ireland's Finance Minister Paschal Donohoe said, "Extension of Article 50 is deeply welcome and very significant." Speaking at an event at Bloomberg's London headquarters, Mr. Donohoe urged MPs to quickly reach a consensus. He added, "But simply agreeing that no deal should be avoided is not enough." The Guardian reported Mr. Donohoe did not commit to whether he would prefer a 3-month or long-term extension. When asked, Mr. Donohoe said, "There are many in the EU who would want to be very clear on how this extension would be used, but added it was important any plan gave stability to markets." Irish Finance Minister Paschal Donohoe has deeply welcomed a Brexit delay. Image Getty. Chancellor Philip Hammond hosted Mr. Donohoe at his Downing Street residence last night. Mr. Hammond said the UK and Ireland must continue economic cooperation amid the Brexit impasse. The Chancellor tweeted, "Given the political circumstances, it's more vital than ever to continue to work closely with our nearest neighbours." It was good to see Irish Finance Minister at No. 11 this afternoon. 9:31 a.m. update. Government denies it is falling apart. David Lidington has denied Theresa May's government is falling apart as the Prime Minister's crumbling control over her party was laid bare in last night's Commons vote. In an impassioned rally, Brexit Secretary Steve Barclay begged MPs to support a Brexit delay as he closed the motions debate. Moments later, Mr. Barclay defied Theresa May's orders and voted against that very policy. He was joined by 6 other cabinet ministers who ignored the Prime Minister. Mr. Lidington said the rebellion did not affect Mrs. May's authority. He told Today it was a free vote in that division yesterday. Now, what happens this morning is that the entire cabinet has accepted the position that Parliament voted for last night. I've been working very constructively with Steve Barclay since his appointment a couple of months ago, despite the fact that he and I were vigorously on opposite sides of the debate during the referendum. And we're continuing to work very constructively together today and in the days to come." Mr. Lidington said he believed that Leave-backing ministers had used the free vote as an opportunity to register how unhappy they were with being in the position where we don't really have an option as a country except to seek an extension of our time in the European Union. 9:07 a.m. update. Macron and Merkel to decide Britain's Brexit future. Britain's future is set to be decided by Emmanuel Macron and Angela Merkel, as the leaders of EU countries most invested in Brexit, recommend how the bloc will react to EMP's decision to beg for an Article 50 extension. Express.co.uk understands that the EU countries most invested in the Brexit process, Ireland, France, Germany and the Netherlands, will largely shape the bloc's position at a leaders' summit next week. French President Macron and German Chancellor Merkel will tell fellow EU leaders to support a Brexit delay, on the condition Theresa May commits to a second Brexit referendum or a softer exit that cross Brexit red lines. The Prime Minister has been warned by senior EU leaders and officials that the bloc will impose a set of strict conditions on any request to extend the bloc's Article 50 exit clause, according to Brussels sources. Read more. Britain's future to be decided by Macron and Merkel. How MPs have given up Brexit control. 8:43 a.m. update. F1 team boss compares Commons faster Monty Python sketch. Mercedes F1 team boss Toto Wolff has said this week's farcical scenes in the House, if Commons are like something out of Monty Python. Formula One teams are deeply concerned about the impact of Brexit on the worldwide sport, with 7 teams based in the UK and many races held in EU countries. Speaking ahead of the 2019 season opening Australian Grand Prix in Melbourne, Mr. Wolff said he has found Brexit tragic but real good entertainment. The 47-year-old Austrian added, "Every evening I watch the House of Commons and I'm not quite sure whether it's a Monty Python thing or what is really happening. For us, we have 26 nations in our company and we are living from the just-in-time principle of getting goods in." Mercedes team principal Toto Wolff has compared the House of Commons to Monty Python. Image Getty. 8:26 a.m. update. Government still hoping for orderly Brexit. Theresa May's deputy has said the government is hoping to leave the EU with a deal, but warned Britain is still legally bound to exit on March 29. Cabinet Secretary David Lidington told BBC Radio, "I hope still we can leave as soon as possible in an orderly fashion. But that depends upon parliamentary approval, both in principle of a withdrawal agreement but also then the implementing legislation that has to follow before lawfully we can ratify that treaty. By the end of March we have to have an alternative in place, not just a resolution of the House of Commons, a preference, but a solution in place that enables US to have an extension so there isn't crash out on March 29. Theresa May's deputy, David Lidington, is still hopeful of an orderly Brexit. Image Getty. 8:14 a.m. update. MPs have decided to delay Brexit. What a damning indictment of our democracy. Today's Daily Express front page. Brands MPs who voted to delay Brexit failures. Image Daily Express. 8:02 a.m. update. Second referendum. Campaigners defiant despite heavy defeat. People's Vote campaigners have claimed hopes for a second Brexit referendum have not died despite a majority of MPs voting down an amendment calling for another vote. Anti-Brexit campaigner Gina Miller, the woman who took Theresa May to court and forced her to put a withdrawal agreement to MPs, said a second referendum is not off the table despite the amendment being defeated by 334 votes, 85. Ms. Miller backed another vote but said it should only happen if all else has failed. The lawyer told BBC Radio 4's Today programme, "Yesterday was about extension and the day before was about taking no deal off the table. You have to try to exhaust all the other options first, and if Parliament can't resolve it, it's at that point that it goes back to the people." Gina Miller has said a second Brexit referendum is still possible. Image Getty. Ms. Miller added she would ramp up demands for another vote after watching MPs defeat Theresa May's deal for a third time. The Prime Minister is expected to hold yet another vote on her twice-failed withdrawal agreement next week. Ms. Miller said, "When we see if the Prime Minister's withdrawal agreement fails again in a meaningful vote and she goes to indicative votes, at that point it's probably time to look at the second referendum."